Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leader Show. This week, we're discussing how to avoid corporate burnout, plus headlines for digital leaders from the world of enterprise technology. Each week, we discuss key issues and news at the intersection of business, tech, and humanities in hopes of making you a better digital leader. We're live each Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and the audio recording is available on major podcast platforms. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up IRPA AI, the Digital Enterprise Institute. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members worldwide, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. You can check us out at irpaai.com or deinetwork.com for resources, advice, and networking opportunities. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga. He's a researcher and author, an educator at the University of Maryland in Georgetown, and former advisor at EY and Accenture. Carlos, good afternoon.
See you again. Great to be back.
How was your week, my friend?
Good week. Busy week as always. Lots to talk about, right, Dan? Lots of headlines. So some very interesting things to kind of kick the show off with today.
I was just mentioning to you before we joined, I was at my first really big conference. I mean, there's been a lot of smaller things and get-togethers, obviously, but my first kind of really large global conference since the pandemic yesterday. Our friends at NICE had a customer experience event, really great event, and a couple thousand people from all over the place. So it was good to get the rust off and be at a industry conference again.
Did you feel that it was sort of back to the past, or has something sort of fundamentally been altered?
No, oddly, I expected it to be very different. I expected it to actually not be great, super attended, but it was. It was like over 2,000 people there. They had some celebrity things. They had like Stomp or similar kind of act. They had Train there do a concert. So I think they did the right things to get. They have Sarah Jessica Parker there today, I think. So they tried to get some things to I guess get the draw, but they got it. I mean, the people were there. And it's a really exciting time. You know, we've talked about AI in every industry. They were talking a lot about AI and how it's going to affect the customer experience space. And I'll be having some articles and content coming out on what I learned at the event. But it felt like kind of back to normal.
Mm-hmm. Anything else catch your attention this week on the headlines?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like it was a big week for Apple. There were a couple announcements that I thought were interesting. Obviously, the big one was their headset, what they're calling kind of a mixed reality, the Vision Pro mixed reality headset, which I thought was interesting. After we kind of, at least I kind of bashed the Meta one for a while, saying I don't get it. It seems like another extension of gaming. I don't see it working in the corporate world. This Apple thing seems to be, really more focused on the corporate world, the Web3 thing, to the extent that some of the gaming community is actually saying that it's not good, which I think is a good sign for us corporate people.
What's remarkable too is the price point, right? I think the Meta headset was around $400 or $500. This is $3,400, so they just went to a whole nother level. I mean, Apple's always premium pricing, but to 10x Meta. You have to wonder what kind of technologies in the device and what the audience is for this kind of a product, right? Super premium, really the first of its kind, I would imagine.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. The CEO of GameStop came out kind of critical of it, but I think, and what's interesting is, they apparently didn't tout the words metaverse or Web3 or any of those buzzwords. But, for anybody who thought that whole thing was dead, it's clearly not. If Apple's investing this much into it, the question is, what will it look like? I hope Apple's vision is more of a, mixed reality world where this is really, augmenting in-person experiences versus I think Meta's vision of we all live in this like cartoon avatar world, but we shall see. The other thing that Apple announced was some big security improvements. I guess they got some criticism around some of the technology they were using on iCloud to detect illegal images or inappropriate images and things, and so they've kind of reversed course on that, but are bringing out some new technology that'll actually flag inappropriate images and things for kids, which, as a parent with young children is is a little bit of a relief. You start thinking about how am I gonna. I mean, I'm a pretty techie guy, but it's just getting so big so quickly, and you wonder how you're gonna keep up with all this stuff.
One interesting thing was that the headset can works in, I think, in multiple modes, right? There is the full kind of close yourself off, but there is part that's sort of transparent. You can sort of see the world around you. So I thought that was actually pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like on the headset thing. I mean, like I said, I've got this I guess the original meta one, and like you're in another world. You can't see anything around you. You don't know where you are. I mean, there's all these safeties about if you leave the boundary or whatever that you've created, because people like bump into walls and fall down flights of stairs. I guess I don't know, but to me that's gaming, right? And I'm not a big gamer, so it sits on my shelf most of the time, and I don't do much with it. They've done some things around concerts and things, which have been kind of interesting, but again, you're in this different world and you're very isolated, right? If you're doing it with a family, you're all very isolated. You're not interacting with each other. It's just you in this other kind of world. I think the mixed reality thing, maybe it's more inclusive. I think it'd be better for work environments. If you and I want a whiteboard or something, we kind of still feel like we're in our office, but I'm kind of transported to yours. And I hope that's where it's going, because I think that's a more real, at least a more realistic application.
What I found interesting this week was I saw an article in the Atlantic, and it sort of took DEI to task. The Atlantic isn't known as a conservative or GOP kind of outlet, right? It's one of the, I think, finest magazines in the country, just from pure writing and quality standpoint. But it was a pretty thorough sort of attack on the DEI industry, DEI consultants, sort of the self-perpetuating world that has been created and sort of fosters of itself. And I wonder whether this is a kind of leaking of or the sort of mainstreaming of what has been a conservative sort of talking point, or as you look at that there is beginning to be kind of a true kind of backlash to it, right? I thought a lot of the critique was fair, and I agree with it. I think a lot of the DEI work that gets sold by consultants and advisors to companies is sort of vague and non-specific, doesn't really address the real issues, and it becomes kind of something you can tick the box off and say, well, we've got this program, but it doesn't really change anything. I've been to a couple of DI conferences in the past, and honestly, I wasn't impressed with that they're offering real solutions to the issues. So I just seeing it in that particular magazine was very interesting. So the backlash only seems to be growing, and we'll see how that plays out in the corporate world the next year or two.
Yeah, I've seen similar things. A number of weeks ago, I saw something similar around sustainability, that it's basically this thing that companies are, monetizing, but it's not really changing anything. And so some
I've seen it around ESG, right?
Yeah, around ESG. Yep.
Right. And so maybe DI was a topic nobody wanted to touch. But back to what we talked about last week, remember about dealing with social issues? Here we go. Right here was a very cogent critique of this sort of part of the corporate landscape. So it'll be interesting to see whether it gets picked up and you start seeing in other places, more mainstream outlets. We'll see. Mm-hmm.
The last story we have to talk about before we invite our guest to join us is this crypto upheaval, Carlos. I mean, we've been talking about it for a long time, and it's kind of ebbed and flowed, but SEC getting really, really on top of the crypto firms, and it's looking like a bad year for crypto.
That and the news about Binance, right? That apparently what Binance a month ago or two was seen as kind of the good sort of version of this, and now they're not. Rumors that they're sort of bankrupt in the United States. So yeah, right. The battle for crypto kind of continues, and we'll see kind of where this one goes as well. Certainly, what we said. I even read that sort of Robinhood is now sort of reconsidering some of its product offerings because of what's going on. So this is a good one to watch going forward.
Yeah, I mean they're freezing assets. People are taking money out. I mean, you're almost gonna have like a similar draw on the banks, like we saw with some of the regional banks now with the crypto world. The net outflows between with the deposits and withdrawals were like $1 billion in the 24 hours afterwards.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, it says right there, $24 billion. So yeah, no. Kind of interesting. I mean, I guess people kind of saw this some people saw this coming. I don't know. What do you think? Is it just a blip on the the long range radar of this thing, or do you think this is a dent that they're not going to be able to come back from?
I still cryptocurrency will have its place, right? I think we're still in this sort of first generation of sort of the retail version of this, and one or two firms will win out, the rest will disappear. Because it's been unregulated, there's been no kinds of shenanigans, as we know, going on in the background. So this is, I think, just cleaning out the people who have their act together and can make something real out of this, from the ones who are, cashing in on the hype and the frenzy for the product, right? So there is real technology here, there is real innovation. Maybe it just hasn't found kind of its role yet in the financial system, but I think it's here to stay. That's fine.
Yeah. So I want to pivot now. We talk a lot about technology, obviously, on this show, but it's really designed to be about leadership and management for anybody in the digital space. And one thing I think we've all experienced, at some point, if not ongoing over the years in the corporate world, is this idea of a burnout. And we talked a little bit about work-life balance and things in the past. So I wanted to invite an expert to talk to us about this. I want to introduce Hannah Holden. She's a corporate burnout survivor, as she says, and specialist and host of the Burnout podcast, former management consultant. Hannah, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. Like I said, we end up talking about a lot of headlines and tech, but there's the other side of leadership and management, and the people part is important. And we all have to think about this as leaders. And, as I mentioned to Carlos a few weeks ago, like there used to be this term, maybe it still exists, but this kind of work-life balance term, which I always thought was kind of a misnomer. Like, does anybody really have, work-life balance? And then, then the pandemic happens, and it seems like there's this pushback the other way of, employees saying, what they're willing to do and not do, come back to work. And so I'm curious as to, how you've seen the evolution first, over the last few years.
Yeah, well, I can assure you I'm not going to talk about tech. So I agree with you. Work-life balance is a bit of an odd one. And I think that achieving a work-life balance and defining a work-life balance is a very personal thing. And I think when it comes to burnout and its relationship with work-life balance, I'm going to go deep in. I'm going to dive straight into talking about burnout. But there are a series of steps that precede burnout. So first of all, most people who experience burnout have what's called a honeymoon period. So often this will be when you're new into a role or new to an organization and you're super excited about it. And when you're super excited about it, it feels okay to throw everything in, to let those boundaries go a bit because you're so into it. Like, it doesn't bother you that you wake up in the middle of the night feeling inspired and making notes about something because you're passionate and it's all very positive. But then that's not sustainable. And so over time, the stress begins to creep in. And then you have this challenge of you haven't set the boundaries when you first started. You haven't really been clear on what you wanted that work-life balance to look like. And now stress is creeping in and you've set a precedent of how you will go the extra mile. And that behavior normally perpetuates even though it's no longer sustainable. So if the boundaries aren't put in place at that point, if the individual isn't thinking about what does balance look like and how can I make this sustainable for me, then they're at risk of continued stress and the stress becoming worse, which then progresses into chronic stress. And burnout is the ultimate outcome of prolonged chronic stress that hasn't been managed. So that work-life balance problem is right there at the beginning when we're in our honeymoon phase. And I'm not suggesting that we don't enjoy it when we're so passionate about a new job. We should enjoy it, but we should also be aware that we are beginning to establish, we're beginning to set some precedents, right? It's okay to call me at night. It's okay that I'm waking up in the night and thinking about work. It's okay that I'm working the extra hours. And so is it okay long-term? Enjoy your honeymoon and throw yourself in and make an impact. But, when the stress starts to show, what is sustainable? And ideally that's the point that you catch yourself. Yeah. And that's where you can avoid burnout.
And so how do you define burnout? Sorry to interrupt, Dan. I'm just curious, putting the definition in place.
Yeah, sure. So I I'm going to give you the WHO definition, the World Health Organization definition. So they have this list of diseases, and but not that they're categorizing burnout as a disease, but they have a classification. And they added burnout in 2019, which I think is really interesting, because if we thought that it was going to get added at any point, it would have been during the COVID years, right? So it was already increasing in prevalence beforehand, to the extent that it was on their radar, and they added it in 2019. Their definition is that it's a syndrome, and they list 3 areas that symptoms show up. So a syndrome is just where somebody is experiencing a set of related symptoms, but it's not necessarily a single root cause. And so those 3 areas are exhaustion, cynicism, and a reduced sense of efficacy. So the one that we all talk about, and the one that we all really understand, is exhaustion. So the physical exhaustion, mental, emotional exhaustion. But the other 2 we don't really talk about so much. So cynicism is about negativity. It's about perhaps the individual will start criticizing what they see their senior management doing. Perhaps they're beginning to be sarcastic at work. I mean, every individual is different, right? So if you're trying to look out for your colleagues, then what you're really looking for is a change in behavior. If somebody used to show up fully positive and fully aligned to the management vision and so on, and now they're beginning to get a bit cynical, that's a suggestion, an indication that things might not be right. The third area is that sense of efficacy. So when you first come in, you really feel like you're making an impact, but when somebody is at burnout, they're kind of overwhelmed by the task. It feels too big. I can't make a difference. And they may see that as being, this is ridiculous. So for me, I was looking at the task, the workload that I had, thinking, this is ridiculous. Like, one person can't do all of this. But for others, they might feel, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. I'm not fit for my job. So those are the 3 areas that the WHO have included in their definition of burnout.
So Hannah, you didn't start off your career though as a mental health person, right? You experienced this. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are now, what you're doing.
Sure. So I think I have some traits in me that are common to many people who end up with burnout. So high achiever, first class honours in biotechnology from King's College London, used to being able to just buckle down and achieve whatever I wanted to. And so that had been my history of, if you want to achieve something, you work hard, you get there, and you get the outcomes that you want. And perfectionism, there's another trait that is common to many people who experience burnout. I spent years so I went from biotech into consulting, into IT. I was in project management, program management, and I loved the high pressure. I was kind of a bit of a adrenaline addict. I loved to be at work and be a little bit wired the whole time, because I felt like it gave me an edge. And it's true that a level of stress does give you an edge. At low levels, you can actually get more energy, you can get more focus. And so I kind of played on that edge for far too long. And therefore, long term, my adrenaline levels and my cortisol levels were not healthy. But yeah, that was the behavior. And then I got into a role in management consulting, permanent role at an international firm. And I totally had the honeymoon period. So I loved it. I loved the international travel. I loved working with such a variety of clients, like UK-based clients. There was a bank based in America. There was a retail firm based in Canada. There were European companies that I was helping colleagues work with. And I just loved being able to support my colleagues and just having that huge impact and all this variety and so on. So threw myself in, but it's not sustainable. And then there were changes in the organization. Other people left, which meant that more and more fell to me, because there were only a few of us who had my area of expertise, and then they started leaving, and it just became more and more and more on me. I mean, looking back now, at the point that people had left, we should have really been doing a gap analysis and thinking, how do we train people up or hire people in so that we have the amount of skills that we need to deal with the demand? But I wasn't thinking like that. I was just thinking that I was the only solution to the problem, because I'd look in the UK workforce and think, well, I'm the only person here with this skill set, and so I'm the only person that can do all this work. And it just became unmanageable. And then I found myself just in a really bad state. I've got I go into quite a bit of detail on one of my podcast episodes about what that experience looked like, but in brief, it looked like collapsing on the kitchen floor and staying there for many hours and just not having a clue what to do, because I didn't recognize myself anymore. I didn't know how to get myself out of that hole.
And I mentioned that I'm a fellow ex-management consultant, and that in my career, I had 2 bosses leave the office on stretchers into an ambulance, right? And so certainly management consulting is a high pressure kind of world that kind of leads to that. Medicine also, good friends, my wife's a doctor, friends who are doctors, they sort of live in that kind of an environment as well. Do you see this, more in certain kind of corporate settings, or is it really just a matter of corporate culture or individual personality?
So I think that burnout can happen to anybody. It is a natural consequence of unmanaged chronic stress. So first of all, this isn't about people being weak, and it is about the relationship between the individual and the organization that they are in. And you can have a really positive environment. I've been in some consultancies who kind of follow through on what they say about caring for people, but then there are others that are far more, the client comes first, the margins come first, the utilization is what we focus on, and you can get, even within teams, it can be, different teams within an organization can experience a different culture. So somebody experiencing burnout is about the relationship that the individual has with the organization, and so culture does play a role. But I don't think that we can say that it's unique to management consulting and, or list which types of careers it's limited to, because if anybody's experiencing chronic stress, then they could be exposed to this.
So the other thing that I saw was that everyone sort of looked around everybody else, right? And if no one admitted they were stressed out, then you wouldn't admit it was stressed out, right? The number, or the quarterly numbers, the quarter number said utilization is utilization. Everybody's got a giant spreadsheet to manage, and so
you couldn't, right, Carlos? Like if you did, you were the outlier. You'd be the one targeted, right? Everybody else is pulling their weight, right?
Right. It's this thing of, well, how much can you handle, right? You don't say no to anything, and so you learn over time. And I would give my consultants the advice of, the firm will take everything you have. It will never say no. So you're going to have to say no. You're going to have to say, I can't work all weekend. You're going to have to say, I can't take that flight. You're going to have to say, I need to spend the week at home. My boss had this joke of DAM, damn, a divorce avoidance methodology, right? So he would say, I have to take a damn week because otherwise I'm going to be single next year. And so he had to make that call. No one else is going to make the call for him. And I think that's true of a lot of organizations. Certainly big global ones, like you said, right? Getting on planes. I fly to Thailand for 3 hours, then to fly home after that. And everyone else is doing it. So you think, well, okay, this must be normal.
Yeah. I agree with everything that you've just said. And I do think that, so there are a list of industries that I think are particularly high stress, management consulting being one of them. And they're all unique, and they all have their own unique attributes that make it more difficult to thrive in that environment. And so the research says that there are 6 aspects of your work life and work, the way that an individual interacts with their workplace that contribute to burnout. And so I'll briefly list them. They are workload, which is the obvious one. Control. So to what extent the individual controls the work that they are doing and is able to influence the location, influence how they do it, perhaps, because some people are subject to, micromanagement. So how much control does the person have over what they're doing? The rewards, and that's not just financial, but also, do people say thank you? Are you in an environment where your contribution is recognized and valued? Do you feel valued? Community, and that's community at work. So do you feel safe and supported by your colleagues? Fairness, do you see everybody having equal opportunities? And values, to what extent are your values aligned with the values of the organization? Now, management consultancy will have its own unique challenges in some of those. So I think that rewards-wise, it's not that bad. Fairness, it's not that bad. Control is really difficult for consultants because they don't have control over the pipeline of work that's coming in. And so sometimes you'll have consultants who are overwhelmed one month with a massive workload, and then the next month there's not much work for them, and then they're worried about redundancies and losing their job. And then there's we've all been in the situation, if you've been a consultant, we've all been in the situation where we've won a piece of work, you're available, it's not a perfect match, it's not really your skill set, but you're the closest match we've got. And we're going to have to field you, and you're going to have to, fly by the seat of your pants and figure it out as you go along, and remain professional at all times and give the client the impression that they have landed the best person for the role because they're paying for it, right? And there's so much pressure on the individual in that situation. It's very difficult for management consultants who are thinking, I'm so brilliant at this. If you put me in the right role, I can make so much impact and so much value. But you've put me over here, and now I feel inadequate. And I'm, so control is a big one for management consultants, I think, and it has its unique challenges. There will be lawyers will have a different set of unique challenges against these different work areas. But yeah, values is interesting.
Is a big deal, right? I remember there was a thing that was done a long time ago, the Whitehall study in the UK, and they looked at quote unquote satisfaction regarding people's employment in Whitehall. And the one thing that was clear from the study wasn't your level, whether you were working for the prime minister directly or whether you were kind of a lower level bureaucrat, had nothing to do with how content you were. It was autonomy. To the extent that you walked in every day and decided how you spent your time, what your world was like, if you could affect the work you did in your sphere of Whitehall, then that meant that you were probably pretty happy at work. To the extent that you came to work, even if you were the number 2 person, but you felt like you were being jerked around by the boss, it didn't matter that you were making more than anybody else, you had the fanciest title, you were going to be pretty miserable. And when I worked with, I spent time at a private senior executive group, and I always saw the same exact phenomenon. To the extent that somebody felt that they were in control of their life, they were pretty okay. To the extent that they felt that even if you were the chief blank officer, you were the puppet of the board of the CEO, or whatever the issue was, you were pretty miserable.
Given that this is, many of your audience are going to be tech leaders, this is one of the reasons why it's so important to do effective change management when you're making technology change, because ultimately technology change is there to have an impact either on your customers or on your staff. And so you really need to be thinking about how you're going to manage that change and the impact on people, because if people don't feel empowered through that change journey, what do we have? Yeah.
The other thing you said, Hannah, and Carlos echoed it, which I thought was really interesting. When you talk about kind of the control over the workload, Carlos, you said the autonomy. I mean, the definition that you gave, Hannah, is almost verbatim the definition, at least in New York, for a employee versus an independent contractor. And so we've talked a lot about the gig economy and people having, side hustles and things like that. And, if the definition of, being able to control your work and have autonomy means that you're actually not an employee, but you're a hired, a consultant, or a freelancer, is that better? Like, is there any way to actually get, that real, balance in the corporate world, or do you see people kind of moving more towards this gig economy, this side hustle? I'm going to run my own business and contract instead of being an employee.
So I think there are pros and cons for every model, and I think different things work for different people. So for me personally, part of my burnout recovery was to move to contracting so that I felt like I could say no to contracts with clients where the location didn't suit me. I didn't want to be spending hours commuting and getting exhausted and not seeing my husband and so on. So I felt that I really wanted that level of control, the ability to be able to say, no, I don't want to do that project. thanks very much. And I don't mind that I'm not going to get paid. I'll just go find somebody else to do.
Right.
So for me, that was really important. But I've spoken to somebody else who actually found that when she was an independent, she felt so much pressure on her to kind of make hay while the sun shines. She was actually in recruitment. And so she found that while she was landing these great candidates, there was pressure for her to land more great candidates and more great candidates. And she probably put pressure on herself, thinking, I need to, I need to make hay while the sun shines. And then, so she experienced burnout whilst being an independent. And for her, part of her recovery program was to go back into a corporate setting, and for her well-being to be not entirely a shared responsibility with the organization, but for the organization to have a level of interest in her well-being. So, horses for courses.
Interesting.
How do you deal with the phenomenon of the sense of, hey, I went through it. If you're a senior leader, therefore the junior people should. Again, one of my good friends is
pay your dues, right?
Yeah, you pay your ENT surgeon. He tells stories about how they would lose students in med school because they would die on their way home. They'd fall asleep at the wheel. They were so exhausted, and he would get to a red light and always put the car in park. He was afraid he would pass out and roll into the intersection. Then when I say, okay, but now you're the senior person, right? You can influence the way people are trained, and the feeling is, well, if that's what made me a great doctor, right? Or that kind of sense of, I went through it. This is how you make great blank, fill in the blank. So where do you begin if you're walking into a CEO of a services firm, or really anywhere, and say, I know the culture has been that this extreme stress makes great people? How do you begin to change that?
How do you begin to change that? That's quite a question. There aren't many things that really fire me up and get my emotions going, but you've just managed to do so by describing that. So I think it's disgusting to treat other people that way. Surely we should learn from our experiences. So my burnout experience was hideous. I do not want other people to go through that. And if I can help people avoid it, learn about it, know what it looks like, begin to have their own self-reflection, begin to make different decisions for themselves. This doesn't necessarily mean quitting your job, but just raising your awareness a little bit, thinking about how you can do things differently. I believe that's what we should be doing as people who have gone through negative experiences. We should do the learning and share it with others so that they don't have to. And I do not advocate this whole, I've got this battle wounds and everybody should get the battle wounds, otherwise they don't get promoted. I think it's disgusting. How do we go about changing it? I mean, if you're working with somebody with an attitude like that, they are only going to create a toxic work environment around them, because they don't have respect for other people. They don't have respect for the human beings that they're interacting with. So I think that's quite difficult.
Yeah, the good news is that it's changed, at least in the medical profession, which I sort of see secondhand, right? That the new generation doctor doesn't want to go through that, right? Yeah. They're asking for a different model.
Yeah, so they should, and they should get it. And I'd like to see the senior members of staff creating that in the way that I just described. So my burnout experience was over 10 years ago. And my more recent position in contracting was head of management consulting at Devo Team in the UK. And that was just, I left there a year ago. So I was there for a few years before that, about 3 years before that. So this was some time after my burnout experience. Now, when I was offered the job, I did take significant pause and think, do I want to do this again? Do I want to be a permanent member of staff in a management consultancy? Do I want to take the risk? Am I ready? Am I ready to support myself and put my own well-being in a place where I can, maintain that? And the thing that inspired me to take the job was firstly the values of the organization. They talk about people, tech for people. And so people are very much at the heart of what they do. But so I felt like this, I could work here. I could work with this. And the other thing that inspired me was I wanted to prove that management consultancies don't need to be like that. I wanted to have a team that I could create an environment where they could thrive. And I'm getting tingles just thinking about it, just talking about it. That we as senior managers, we can do that. We can learn from the experiences we have, and we can create spaces and ways of working that help people understand how to navigate the challenges, especially in, for me, I can help somebody navigate the challenges in management consultancy in a way that helps them see the signs and do things differently. And as a senior manager, I could be the one that would say, you know what, I will go and have the difficult conversation with the client. I will go and reset some expectations, because it's not acceptable to drop you an email this morning and say, that thing that we wanted to do in 3 weeks' time, can you do it today? It's not acceptable. So, we're the only ones that can make that change, the senior management, because it can't be the junior that says, I want to reset the client's expectations.
Hannah, you talked before about kind of the relationship between the company and the individual, but how about even from an individual standpoint, right? How do you walk the line between motivation and achievement and wellness, right? Because I know as a young entrepreneur in business school and things, I mean, it was driven into you that motivation, that work 80-hour week, and I know I struggle with that, right? I mean, I want to do what I can for my business and for the people I work with, but I also want to see my family. Carlos has been pushing me into stoicism, and I find it's very difficult to reconcile those kind of stoic principles with what you're taught. Certainly, I think in the U.S., maybe even more than elsewhere. A capitalistic world to just do what you got to do.
So there's a quote, I was just skimming to try and find the exact words of the quote, so I'm going to badly misquote it, but there's a quote that says something along the lines of, either you invest in your wellness or you're going to be forced to invest time in your illness. And I don't know if you follow the Diary of a CIO. I've seen him posting about how health is the foundation of everything, that if you don't have your health, then everything else is impacted. Your relationships are impacted, your work, your ability to perform at work is impacted. So I think that we need to understand that it's part of. So if you say the one and only thing that matters to me is that I achieve my promotion this year, looking after yourself as you do that is part of working towards that goal. And if we begin to shift our mindset on looking after ourselves and realizing that we're the most important person in our lives, and without our health, without our well-being, nothing else is going to be possible.
Because we do that in the physical world, right? I mean, when I was younger and in better shape, right, there was always that thing where they would say, hey, if you're injured, don't work out because you're only going to injure yourself worse, right? So it seems counterintuitive, but to give yourself the break and heal, right? Otherwise, you're going to make the healing process longer. But for some reason, that hasn't always translated to mental health in our society, right?
Yeah, agreed.
What advice do you give to someone who's in one of these kinds of environments and doesn't have the power necessarily to change it, but wants to start putting the boundaries? Or do you do that? Or you say, look, if you're stuck in this kind of place, the best thing to do is to find some solution outside of the workplace, right? There are other things you sort of balance, maybe optimal in the workplace, but with something that's good outside the workplace.
Yeah. So one of the topics that we were potentially going to touch on was this idea of self-care. And I think we need to be careful, because I know a lot of people who are burnout specialists who don't like the term self-care. And it's because it becomes a bit of a sticking plaster, that there's a belief that you can work flat out under really stressful conditions whilst you're at work, and maybe work long hours and be doing it at the weekend. But if you go for your weekly massage, you'll be okay. And that's just not the case. There needs to be a bit more of a balance there. So we need to be careful not to oversimplify and think that as long as I've done my work and I can take my evening off, then I've established a balance. I think that as I said earlier, it's very unique to each individual. So how do you feel about your situation? Like what is causing you stress? What is sustainable for you? And what is important to you? Because for some people, that would look more like finishing on time, but perhaps doing a bit of extra time in the evening, finishing early so that they can spend some time with their family, and then they come back later. That that how to get the work-life balance and kind of integrate that into their lives is going to be unique for different people. Personally, I'm a huge advocate of morning routines, and to spend some time in the morning. So for me, a morning routine was part of my burnout recovery, fundamental to it. And the reason being that I would show up every morning for myself and I would say, because I'm the most important person in my life, I'm going to do something for myself before I do anything for anybody else. And I am committed to my morning practice. And that might be 5 minutes of sitting on my yoga mat, just breathing, or it might be a full 1 hour session, whatever it is. But I am committed. And when I committed to doing that, there was something very practical in it. It's not just saying an affirmation of, I know I'm worthy and I'm important in my life and blah, blah, blah. But the act of me getting up was subconsciously telling myself, I'm the most important person. I do something for myself first, which is why I'm such a huge advocate of some form of morning routine. And what does that morning routine look like? It will be different for everybody. So some people might just want to sit and listen to some music. What we want to do is try to be mindful and be present and not use that time to explore the shopping list and the to-do list and and the regrets from yesterday and how the meeting went. And the time isn't meant to be used for that. So to focus on something, you can do guided meditations, you can do breath work, you can just sit peacefully and really focus on a piece of music. It can be as simple as that, and it can be as short as 5 minutes or maybe even less some days. But I think that the act of doing something for yourself, really teaching yourself that you matter, is at the root cause and at the root solution. And so when you say, what can a junior person do? They can start by creating habits that prove to themselves, that really tell themselves on a subconscious level, I'm important, and then see how that plays out through their day. Because I think, we talk about boundary setting, but boundary setting doesn't have to always be super assertive. It is an assertive act, but it can be as simple as, I've just decided that I'm going to allow myself half an hour for lunch, and I don't need to justify that to everybody. I'm just going to block it out in my diary, and I can just quietly set that boundary for myself and create that space for myself. I mean, there are other times where you do have to have a conversation with somebody about, I know that historically I've always worked 3 till 8 p.m., but it's not sustainable. I can't continue to do, there are times where you have to have a conversation about setting a boundary. But I think that there's many things that we can do for ourselves that don't involve challenging conversations. And I think that mindset shift of beginning to see yourself as one of the most important things on your to-do list today, that's fundamental.
Yeah, I agree with you on the morning routine, and I am admittedly not a morning person, but the morning routines have helped me. The other is just taking breaks, right? Taking, for me, disconnected, off the grid breaks, walks when possible, things like that. I read some research recently on deep work, even from a work standpoint, it's better for you, right? You tend to, your brain, I guess it's burnout in a way, daily burnout, your brain needs a rest, and you actually accomplish more, when you take breaks, and your brain can, I guess, reset. So that's, I mean, it's worked for me, when I've tried to, do those things, even exercise or walks and things like that. But I'm still kind of working. I'm still like on my phone, and I'm still on my email. You come back and you're exhausted, but when you really disconnect for a little bit of time, you come back and you're actually, refreshed. It's an odd thing.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, the reason that I love morning routines is because it's the act that you do first, and it subconsciously is telling yourself, I do something for myself first because what your brain is learning from that is I'm important. Whereas, there are a number of reasons as well, because I think that if you get yourself in the right mindset, it has an impact through the rest of the day. If you do it late at night, then it's only going to have an impact until you go to bed, and you've lost the opportunity of it having an impact for the whole of your day. So big advocate of morning routines. Another thing that I'm an advocate for is learning how to use kind of hacks to calm your nervous system. And this can be instant, pretty much instant. We're talking seconds, maybe a minute. So you can use techniques and hacks to be able to calm your nervous system very, very quickly. And you can use this at any time, and you can use it. So I've got a free download which sets out some of my favorite techniques. But for example, the vagus nerve, which is the main nerve of the parasympathetic nervous system, and the parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for our rest and digest. You can stimulate that by pressing or tapping on the sternum. And you can do that quite subtly. So I can do that by pressing, and you wouldn't know what I'm doing. So at the moment, I'm actually leaning against my hand and pressing on my sternum, but nobody would know that. And that is actually, I am consciously deciding that I'm going to calm my nervous system down as we talk. And so there are these hacks which we can use. And that one might not be appropriate in person, but there are breathing techniques that you could use in person. And so, yeah, I think that's another great, there are so many tips and techniques and hacks out there. So fill your kit bag full of those and figure out which ones work for you, and use that through your day as and when you need to. So that even if you don't get to take breaks, for example, then you're context switching constant. Because for me, in my most recent consulting role, constant context switching, back-to-back meetings,
right.
And having techniques like that in my back pocket, being able to do that whilst everybody has a nice chat when we start the beginning of the call, like they're all just, hi, how are you? And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go on mute. I'm going to I might turn my camera off for a couple of minutes and do some breathing whilst they're all just chit chatting. And then I feel like, okay, well, it wasn't exactly a break, but I'm ready to go again, So I think there's so much we can do. There's so much out there.
Before we go, do you see a difference in terms of genders of how men and women, generally speaking, right, deal with this, or really it's a person by person thing?
So I think it's a person by person thing. There is a book that I've read about burnout, which suggests that women might be more prone to it because of, and I'm generalizing here, and the whole book is generalizing, right? Because women have a habit of giving themselves away. We are mothers, we are carers, we have a role in society to be the supportive, that we often take up the role of, it's our responsibility to make sure that the housework is all done, I know that many relationships are more equal, but we'll be the ones that pick up the constant, the shopping list in our head of things that we need to pick up for dinner, make sure that we've got everything that we need. So there are these kind of invisible tasks that women pick up that suggest that perhaps they might be more impacted. For me, I don't feel that. I think it's an individual thing. I think that we can all experience, as I said before, burnout is the consequence of chronic stress. Anybody can be subject to that. I don't think the stats are there to back this up, to say that women are more susceptible than men.
The thing that I have read, the research, that was interesting research report a couple of years ago that said that if two spouses come home, there's a male and a female spouse, the female spouse is more often willing to stop talking about her stress to deal with the husband's stress. So they both may begin at the same kind of point, but they're sort of more ready to stop, venting in order to let the husband, do the venting. And this was pretty consistent across different cultures. The other thing I find interesting is it seems oftentimes a kind of Anglo-Saxon thing too. Putting aside Japan, where I worked for 2.5 years, which is famously like bananas about burnout, right? But if you spend time in Latin America, I don't think it's that bad. Central Europe, sort of not that bad. There's just something about the work in the UK and working in the US, and it seems especially problematic in our two countries.
I laugh because I used to work for the British Council, and they've got offices all over the world. And I got deployed. We were working on this global rollout program, telco rollout program, and so I got sent to Chile to go and keep an eye on what the Chilean team were up to in reality, because they were telling London that they were going to be rolling out Brazil on Monday, and then Monday would come and they were not in Brazil, and the Brazil office is saying that they're not here, and we contact them and they say, oh no, the kit's not here, so we'll do it next week. And so there was a lack of communication. But then I went out there and I was there with my project plan. I was constantly updating it went with me everywhere. And they just laughed at me, and they were very much like, oh man, Johanna, really, you need to just relax. And then my boss, when I was over there, so the project manager who I was kind of working for and with over there, he said, I want you in the office 9 a.m. sharp on the first day. So jet lag aside, the fact that I'd only landed a few hours previous, whatever, I'm there, 9 a.m., that's what we said. Mm-hmm. And when I said 9 a.m., I didn't really mean 9 a.m. Can you please not arrive before 10 a.m.? Because the rest of us won't be here before 10 a.m. So you might as well just be here at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that cultures are different. I don't know if it is an Anglo-Saxon thing, but it certainly wasn't prevalent in the Chile office for the British Council, I can tell you that much.
Interesting. Hannah, this is a great conversation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, we're out of time. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun.
Our pleasure. Thanks, Hannah. So Carlos, I feel like we've talked about bits and pieces of this, but it was good to kind of get it all into one session.
As a topic, right? Because it's something that we all deal. If you have any kind of senior corporate role or any kind of corporate role, right? The pressure is always on. It's a demanding world. I think, especially in the U.S., there's always a higher level of kind of job uncertainty, right? That's just part of our culture, and which contributes to. We didn't talk about it, but it contributes to this. So you're right, and I like one of the things that I see kind of in the millennial culture, right, is this more willingness to talk about mental health, which wasn't the case before, and I think that's a fantastically positive thing. Right? Okay, yeah, there may be a little bit too much here and there, but for the most part, I'll take that over everybody suffering in silence while they become alcoholics or jump out of windows or get carried out of the office on stretchers. So
yeah, I'm with you.
I think the world is getting better in this regard.
Sounds good.
Good night.
I like it, Carlos.
Positive note to end on, Dan.
Positive note to end on. We'll be back next Wednesday, live noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks, Carlos.
Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.